kind of go to, oh yeah, almost forgot that. So let's move into our all right. So the quote for the day: don't wait for success, go out and create it. So thank you for all of you being here, because that's what we're hoping to do out of this. So, our goal for the design the design lab is to start developing that plan on how we're going to go create success for our institutions and for our adult learners at our institutions. So and it's incumbent on us to take that energy and develop those plans and forge ahead to find the ways to implement those plans. So great inspirational quote. Christine, again, thank you as always for providing a good quote to set the tone. As alluded to in our in-person convening, more information is continuing to come together on what the Innovation Investment Awards from the center are going to look like. So I wanted to provide just a couple of minutes to talk through what the Innovation Investment Awards from the Center for Adult College Success will look like. We've got kind of some rough outlines to share, which I think will be valuable to keep in the back of your mind as we're going through this exercise today, and of course throughout the design lab. So timeline, our goal is to have the application for the investment awards available on March 15th. And then the applications won't actually open until May 1st. And this is intentionally done so we can get well on our way to completing our design lab work when the application window is open. And then applications will be due on July 15th. Our goal is to select the recipients in early August and have the recipients notified no later than mid-August. And if you get into if you're one of the recipients of the Innovation Awards, we'll start working with you right away and get things rolling towards the end of August. And because we're funded from federal grant dollars, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, the funds have to be expended by, in this case, September 1st of 2026. So it is essentially a 2-year grant horizon here. That deadline is to make sure that we can get all of the reporting that we'll need from you to the state, who has to turn it into the feds. So if you've seen stuff on the federal grants that go to December, the reason why we're September is so we can get through all of that process and paperwork. So that kind of covers the timeline. As a reminder, as we go on to the next slide, the Innovation Awards are intended to be grants of potentially up to $1 million. And we're hoping to see some collaboration in the applications, but individual institutions are welcome to apply as well. The other key thing I wanted to share that I think would be valuable for today is, the goal of these awards is and the reason why they're large dollar is to put out the resources necessary to do true system change work at institutions. But we're leaving that relatively broad. System change that's going to boost adult completion is the bottom line for us. So it can be flexible scheduling and accelerated degree programs, prior learning assessments, credit for prior learning, competency-based education, those adult navigators, proactive or comprehensive advising supports, or anything kind of related in that bucket. Looking at co-rec support and remediation, work-based learning, apprenticeships, internships, other kind of employer-based programs that will help lead to success for adult students. Of course, eliminating barriers to transfer and basic needs support, career-aligned and guided pathways. That's not meant to be an exhaustive list. That's just to give you an idea of some of the items that we're looking at. Applications can be for just one of those or for multiple as we go through this. We're also kind of have this open-ended. If you've got something else that's really cool that you want to try and implement on your campus that has evidence-based, outcomes on it that's not on that list, we're willing to take a look at it. We'll have a lot of opportunities for questions. We're looking at hosting office hours and other things along those lines once the application's made available. I see there is a question from Caleb in the chat. You are understanding the timeline correctly. This is one of those unique things. Our intent is to have the full application available on March 15th. So you can start working on it with a full picture of what the request is and in that mid-March window. And then the earliest you could submit is May 1. I wouldn't recommend submitting on May 1 necessarily, but we will start taking applications then. We'll have more information at our March convening. We'll have the timelines more firmly built out with opportunities for feedback and office hours and things along those lines to help coach people through the grants. So more information to come, but I wanted to share at least a little bit of what I was comfortable sharing at this point in time. And then Christine, if you can go back to the system change slide. Yeah. One thing I want to note on this is we will likely be weighting some of these over others. And the rationale for that is because we're trying to coordinate with the 60 by 30 office on the grants that Sarah kind of previewed at our in-person convening last month. And I know more information will be coming out. So we're trying to not be too duplicative of some of the work. And one example I'll throw out without knowing her grant details is basic needs support. We'll probably not weight that as high as some of the other ones because there's an entire pot of money in the state budget for basic needs support. So a lot of that is still to be determined. You'll have that information in March, but I'm spending a lot of time with the 60 by 30 office on how we can coordinate our grant dollars with their grant dollars to make the most impact and to make the most sense. Also on that note, as we're looking at the 60 by 30 grant information, and that'll be coming out in the coming weeks. And so we should be able to talk more about it in March. We want to make sure that you can utilize this opportunity, not just to apply for our awards, the Design Lab, but make sure you're well prepared for anything you might want to pursue that the 60 by 30 office is going to be making available. The one thing I can share at this point is I can tell you that they will be looking, they'll have some options, as I think Sarah noted in January, to do some planning work. But for some of their awards, they will also be looking to make sure that some planning activities have been commenced before that application is put in place. And so the Design Lab is one of those things that you'll be able to say, hey, we went to this Design Lab, we've thought this all out, and should put you in a good position in applying for some of those 60 by 30 awards as well. So that's our hope and goal with this process, not just our own innovation awards. Question was raised, how many awards are anticipated from the center? We have a $5 million pot of money. We will award money until that runs out. So it kind of, the number of awards is kind of dependent on the size of the awards that are being asked of us. So I'm really hoping that folks look at this and put together a really good application, and not everything comes in at $1 million, because then we're limited to 5. So my hope would be we could do, 8 to 10, but we'll see what shows up. We go until the money runs out. With that, I think that kind of covers my components of the session today. If you've got additional questions that come up along the way, you're always welcome to reach out. And like I said, we'll have more information on March. And I'm going to turn it over to Allison and the SOVA team to talk about student success and adult learners.
Great. Thank you so much, Jeremy. And I'm excited to be with y'all here today. Let me make sure that I can share my screen effectively. All right. Are you seeing the right screen here? Hey, thanks, Eric. All right. Okay, so one of the reasons that we, as the SOVA crew, so Jennifer and Bruce are here as well, and I invite you to dive in wherever you would like in the chat or elsewhere. But I wanted to just say that as the SOVA team engages with you in the coaching process, we know that we're kind of balancing a couple of things. One is meeting you where you are in your work. One is helping you think very specifically about this Design Lab process as one that is aimed at producing a high quality grant proposal, right? Helping to facilitate a process through which you're allowed and able and supported to do that. But we also know that from the work that all of us are doing all over the country on large scale student success work, that there's just a lot more to this than any given grant focus, right, can sort of lock us into. So we want you to think about the grant opportunity and to think about all of the opportunities with respect to funds in Michigan, but we also want to help encourage and create the conditions for us to think together about the broader imperatives facing institutions. And so I'm excited that, we were thinking about this with the ESG crew as kind of a funnel. This is the wide end of the funnel to give you a little bit of perspective about the student success movement in general, where it came from, and how adult learners are impacted by the student success movement. This will be really, really fast. But then also, what have we learned? What have institutions around the country learned? The movement began with community colleges and access-oriented four-year institutions, but it has expanded out in lots of different ways. So I'm going to share a little bit of content with you and ask you to think about, as you are thinking about the focus of your proposal, your why, right? The conversations that you're having with Jennifer and Bruce in your coaching sessions, how do you think about what you're trying to do with this grant from the perspective of the broader imperatives facing your institution with respect to promoting greater success for adult learners? So I'm not going to start with the prehistory, but let me just say, I think higher ed in the US begins in the mid 1600s. And for that entire time, up until the 1950s and 60s, it was not about either access or success for institutions. But with the emergence of community colleges beginning in the 1950s and 60s, there was for the first time a kind of expression in this country that we have a social contract that says, regardless of accidents of birth or fortune, higher education is a path to opportunity, right? And that's what community colleges were intended to promise for us as a country. For the first decades of their existence, they were focused exclusively on their access mission. That was it. It was existing and having open doors, open to anybody was enough. That was successfully fulfilling the mission. And at this point, universities were primarily not access oriented, but many became access oriented, also not concerned so much with anything other than creating access for people. Now, with the early 1990s, late 80s, community colleges for the very first time start looking actually at their data. And they begin looking at what is in fact happening to their students once they have access. And this is where the completion agenda takes off. And so the student success movement really crystallizes or begins when community colleges start looking at their data for the first time ever about what's happening to their students and say to themselves, an access mission without a reasonable shot of success for students is a false promise, and there has to be more that we can do. It was also the moment that colleges began saying for the first time to themselves, as they looked at their data, what is our role in this, right? So we all know life happens to students and the greater challenges and constraints, economic insecurity, all kinds of challenges, right, produce barriers for students. But really until the 90s, colleges were not saying, and we also raise barriers for students in the way that our policies and practices are established. So, in the early 2000s, you start to see national networks emerge like Achieving the Dream. I know many of your, the community colleges in the space here have some engagement with Achieving the Dream historically over time. You'll note if you're from a university or an independent institution that your institutions were not as represented in the movements around student success. Membership organizations like Ask You and others have started to change that in recent years, but four-year institutions, universities were in some cases sort of somewhat left out of this work, and in other cases became field leaders. So I know everybody here is familiar with Georgia State, right? So there are pockets of innovation that have appeared, networks, there has been the growth of philanthropic support. And then, we get to the mid 2000s and, we start to see that boutique interventions are not resulting in sustained gains for students. So colleges begin to look at their data, they begin to see what's happening to students, and they begin to proliferate interventions and innovations, and let's do this, and let's try this, and let's try that. The spaghetti at the wall approach to student success. And after about a decade of that, it becomes clear that that kind of approach to student success by itself is insufficient. And so it's never been a better time to be involved in large-scale student success work, because we now have a couple of decades of really strong work and effort underway in lots of different pockets across the country, and at a growing scale for community colleges and access-oriented universities. But back in the sort of the beginning pieces of this, so again, not very long ago, we're talking within the last 10, 15 years, we begin to see, through a combination of researcher activity and institutional activity, the emergence of what is called the loss and momentum framework. And it shows up in lots of different places and ways. It might even come by different names at this point, which is a good sign, because that means it's sort of taken root as one of the ways of thinking about student success efforts. And so this was a framework that was developed through the Completion by Design initiative to help colleges identify where students meet their greatest obstacles to persistence and completion. Again, this was for all community college students, but always community college students had large numbers of adults, right? So at this point, I'm talking just generally about community college students in general and access-oriented university students. And so the framework was designed to assist in identifying interactions between an institution and its students that either propel momentum points, that either help students persist, or that impede students' progression, where large numbers of students fall off, right? And so, as Bruce and Jennifer in the conversations with you are asking questions like, what do you know about what's happening to your adult students? What do you know about how they're faring? What do you know about the places at which they are meeting barriers? Those are the kinds of fundamental questions that are, sort of the grounding of this perspective. It's important to also note that, this was the first time ever that colleges and universities began looking at themselves through the lens of a student's journey, through student experience. Up until that point, and we are very much saturated in this as institutions, you look at things, we all look at things from where we sit, from inside our systems, from inside our expertise, from inside our areas, right? This was the first attempt to really look at what's happening, at institutions from the student lens. The loss of momentum framework was pretty quickly evolved, because it turns out that completion of credentials isn't actually the goal. The goal is socioeconomic mobility through higher education, right? And so if you think about 1.0, student success work was access, creating access for all. 2.0 was from access to completion of credentials, the completion agenda. And now we are squarely in the sort of 3.0 phase here, which is completion of credentials isn't enough. Completion of credentials of value, labor market advancement, and socioeconomic mobility are what we're aiming at. So the loss of momentum framework has been evolved over time by researchers and practitioners to really speak to this broader perspective of what we mean when we're talking about achieving greater student success. Again, the thing that's really helpful about this, in addition to it being very straightforward and beautifully student focused, right, that it is about the student's journey and experience, is that it gives you a point of entry for looking at different kinds of interventions and activities and initiatives and efforts, places that you can place your attention if you know more about where your students, where your adult learners are facing their greatest challenges. And so we adapted, and thanks, shout out to Bruce on this. We adapted, this was adapted from a kind of theory of change slide that was created by the researchers at Columbia Teachers College, Community College Research Center, about the kinds of student behavior metrics, student experience stages, and the redesigned institutional practices and policies that support student success, that support momentum and mitigate against loss points in the loss of momentum framework. And so you can see here that there are discrete things, right? Within connection, you can see how the different pieces connect. There's program organization and information, there's student onboarding, there's ongoing support, and there's program-specific teaching and learning. You can see how these pieces show up across the student's learning journey, and you can begin to think about what some of these, some of the practices and policies are that particularly impact adult students. So we slightly modified these to speak to specifically adult students, but this speaks to all learners, in fact, and there is a broader version of this out in the world that you can go check out. I think the other thing to say on this piece before digging in a little bit more on the evolution of the movement and how we think about the development of guided pathways initially as a framework and a movement, is that, you know, the idea that a collection of individual boutique practices that touch a few students isn't enough was one of the, you know, I mentioned this as something that appeared about a decade after institutions started looking at their data and trying to innovate on behalf of better outcomes. The relevance of the loss momentum framework here is that all of these pieces actually matter. Now, this doesn't mean that you do all of these things simultaneously and you pursue them all at once, but it means that when you're thinking about what you're trying to produce or achieve in terms of better outcomes for your learners, for your adult learners, these are all pieces of the puzzle. And so there may be areas, and, you know, if we think back to the ESG self-assessment that you all took, you can, you know, you had the opportunity to talk about some of the things that you're doing, right? We've done some of this and we're doing some of this, right? But how do those pieces fit together, and where are the gaps and opportunities based on what you know about who your adult learners are, or who you want them to be, right? If it's about attracting and serving more students in your region not currently served by your institutions. So want to put this out here for you to think about. We'll probably return to it in a few different ways in the coaching sessions. And then I'm going to just tell you a couple more quick things and then hand it back to the SG folks. But if there's anything, Bruce or Jennifer, from your own experiences or from the coaching that you want to reiterate or stress here, I'm happy to take a beat.
The only thing I'd say, thanks, Allison, is really, I mean, to think about, I think you made a great point about looking at discrete practices and see how they fit within a larger systemic framework and how they drive specific outcomes, right? So thinking about that equation between what's our current state, what's the solution we want to implement to improve that state, and then what are the metrics that demonstrate whether or not we're successful at that intervention or strategy is successful.
Great, thanks. All right. Okay, so again, CCRC, those of you at community colleges are probably familiar with the Redesigning America's Community Colleges book, which was the sort of statement, the crystallizing statement around the guided pathways movement initially, and the Community College Research Center at Columbia University Teachers College has been the sort of leading or a leading research engine in this space. And so one of the things that we do is watch as their work evolves. They're now studying 400 institutions that are doing this work. They're engaged in this movement in virtually every state in the country, and they're continuing to publish learnings along the way. Here's what we're learning. Here's where, and refreshingly, you'll find if you go and check out their work that they'll say, here are the things that here's what we thought in 2015, and here's now what we see in 2022 or 2021. And so it's really refreshing to watch people learn and to evolve in their work. And so this was the 2021 sort of updated statement of, here are the components of comprehensive student success work aligned to the loss and momentum framework, right? It had to do with organizing programs of study by career clusters or meta major and backward mapping, right? Redesigning the student onboarding experience, reorganizing advising to enable case management, and integrating active and experiential learning. You'll see across their work, and this will be a topic for a subsequent conversation, increased attention on applicability of credits and transfer. So we know, and I had it on a previous slide, that an overwhelming majority of community college students intend to earn a bachelor's degree, at least a bachelor's degree, and very few are able to sort of make it through our processes and systems and policies and practices and across institutional boundaries to make that a reality. And so transfer improvement work has shown up also increasingly as a focus of Pathways work. All right. So I'll share this with you and you all can check it out. CCRC is also, because I know many of you are thinking about recruitment and attracting and retaining adult learners as you think about onboarding, the ASIP approach to onboarding, asking students about their interests, really engaging them effectively, connecting every student with the right kinds of humans at the institution to help them feel a sense of purpose and belonging, inspiring them in courses, right? And helping them plan a full plan. Like, these are things that are important for any learners, but they are particularly important for adult learners. So again, you know, if you think about what the conventional practices are for our institutions and what the ASIP practices entail, you can see what it looks like to sort of shift from a traditional way of thinking about passively receiving students. You know, historically, students only got to meet with an advisor, you know, when they were about to graduate or be put on academic probation, right? And so a lot has changed in recent years, but there's still a lot to know about how to connect the dots. All right, last thing. Because SOVA cannot talk about ideas without talking about implementation. I will just say that as we look across the work that we do in a variety of places, that regardless of the intervention or the practices that are being sought by institutions, there are common barriers to all types of student success innovation that may be particularly challenging when it comes to centering the needs of adult learners that we just want to put on your radar. So we'll share this with you afterward as a PDF so that you can dig in a little bit more with your colleagues. And if you want to talk about some of these things as you are in your coaching sessions with Jennifer and Bruce, we want to make sure that you've got it on your radar to think about what it means to have an unifying vision grounded in evidence, right? How do you connect the dots between what you're trying to do? We know that silos, and you've all said it in a variety of ways, I think, or signaled it in a variety of ways, that institutional internal silos are really hard to span, and they're really hard to connect dots across so that all the people that have an impact on adult learners are sort of working together in concert across areas. And then insufficient supports, right, for mid-level leaders, a variety of folks continue to stymie efforts to implement evidence-based practices at scale. And so I'm going to stop sharing now. And, happy to, if, as you're listening to this, you think about what this means for your proposal or how to better integrate some of these ideas into your planning processes. I know Jennifer and Bruce have both substantial, and I mean substantial. Jennifer was in the middle of, for real, Pathways work in California for many years, and Bruce has been on the ground in many, many states. Like, you've got really good folks there to be present for you as you work through and practice what some of these theoretical things can mean for you and for your proposal. All right, handing it back to you, Christine.
Thank you so much, Allison. Really great to see the historical context, but how it connects not just to the work that we're doing at community colleges, but also the work that we're doing at four-year institutions, because the things that we're talking about, they apply regardless. It just happens that in some of these cases, the learning labs have been community colleges, but with the great work that they're doing in Georgia and others, there are a lot of really great examples that we can elevate as part of this work. So what we're going to do now is to do a little bit of a shift and just take it to the next level and talk about what are some characteristics. Allison mentioned the funnel approach. So now we're going to take it from here's the really big reasons why and some of the key elements that are associated, and talk specifically about pathways. And we'll talk a little bit about small P pathways and big P pathways, and I'll tell you a little bit about what the difference between those are. I'm going to share my screen and kick it over to my colleague, Eric, who's going to talk a little bit about LMI before we dig in on some other elements that are associated with seamless pathways that accelerate.
Yeah, thanks, Christine. Good afternoon, everyone. Eric Shree. I'm an associate at ESG on the post-secondary attainment team. As Christine mentioned, we'll be talking about seamless pathways that accelerate. I'll be starting at a high level, just kind of doing some level setting, bringing up Michigan context, and then Christine will talk more about the actual types of models. Do want to be really clear first, though, we're not recommending any one type of model. Just want to bring up guiding principles, features, experiences that we believe are part and parcel to these models. Also want to say that we've collected case studies and looked at institutions who are exemplars across the nation. So if you have any further questions, please feel free to reach out. And then finally, that any of these pathways and models that we're talking about really need to be communicated to adult learners so that they know the importance and understand how to use these things as well. I want to move to the next section, which is just want to focus in on, make a little note on language. We will be talking about non-credit programs. And just for clarity, want to say that when we're talking about non-credit programs, we're talking about industry-focused technical training types of programs, not continuing ed type of programs. I also want to say that non-credit programs, non-credit in particular, is deficit-based language. And while we've sort of looked for other terms, things like workforce credit, believe that that sort of terminology still has some limitations. And for the purposes of this presentation, we're going to continue to use the term non-credit programs. Also for degree programs, we're talking about those types of programs that lead to an associate, applied associate or bachelor's degree. And then we're talking about pathways, just that they have a clear route, identified steps from one program to the next. And these pathways aren't sitting in an advisor, these maps aren't sitting in an advisor's desk, but are being communicated to adults, that they're being internalized, and that they're clear and sequential. Moving to the Michigan landscape analysis, first just want to give credit to MCACS for an incredible report, and you can find these numbers and this work in that report. But 2.5 million Michiganders that lack a post-secondary credential, and this is particularly important in a state that has a declining population, has a declining high school graduating class, and where 39% of Michigan households live at or below the ALICE threshold for household survival. As well, I want to talk about the 1.6 million some college no degree students, particularly in a state like Michigan that has had an economic model that's worked from high school to workforce. You have 1.16 million, Michiganders who have attempted college, who were unsuccessful, who may be having, questioning that decision, also just questioning the value of higher ed. So really important number, as well as 5.5 or 5% increase in some college no degree between 2021 or the 2021 academic year and the 2021 and 2022 academic year. Like to also just quickly go into Michigan transfer data. So, we have community colleges here, we have four-year institutions, and 80% of bachelor degree holders in Michigan have taken a course at a community college, as well as for any Michigan community college students who've transferred to a four-year, receive their bachelor's degree, they're leaving on average with 30 excess credits. So obviously some friction in that pathway. And this is particularly important, again, for adult students who lag traditional age students by 17 percentage points when it comes to earning a certificate, a degree, or transferring to a four-year institution. This was also work done by CCRC, who's mentioned a lot in the SOVA presentation. Just want to point that out as well. Moving on to the next slide. So when we talk about what defines a high quality accelerated pathway? Some of these features are, right, we're fast tracking students as quickly as we can into credential or degrees into high demand careers. It is of minimal or no cost to students when and where possible. We're also addressing barriers that ensure equitable access and participation. So think about childcare support or high flex or flexible scheduling, things along those lines. And from the student experience, especially important for adult learners, having integrated work-based learning experiences. This could be anything from job shadowing to micro internships, could be on the job training, but whatever, having some sort of connection to work. Again, making sure that these college courses are sequential and make sense. And then finally, that college advising and career advising are also embedded into this type of pathway work. Moving on to the next section, I did want to bring back the self-assessments that you did at the beginning of this design lab. Want to say, we're going into some of these, so we just wanted to bring up the importance of all of these. So 80% of respondents for the self-assessment talked about credit for prior learning. 62% talked about using LMI data as a priority, and then 60% had creating alignment between their credit and non-credit pathways as a priority. So as we go into these later, the things that Christine will be bringing up, just want to highlight the importance of all of these. So moving on to labor market information, I'm going to be really quick here. I just want to provide a visual representation. You've heard me talk a lot about labor market information already and sort of gone into the nuts and bolts of it. So I just want to provide kind of a visual pathway so people can kind of get a sense and understanding of this for any of the visual learners out there. When we look at the right-hand side, we're looking at those in-demand, high skill, high wage types of jobs, occupations that we're using labor market information to find. And then we can sort of backwards map, what are the pathways where an adult might enter and what is the pathway that it's going to look like for them. So majority of your adults are probably at the very top stream, in work already, and then are thinking about joining either through apprenticeship or some kind of training program, maybe going into a 2-year degree program, or maybe going into a 4-year from there. You may have some adults who don't have a high school degree, and there are certainly avenues like adult basic ed using IET programs and things along those lines, but likely it's a lot of your sort of top level at work already and sort of the pathway through to some type of occupation and career. And so I will pass it off to Christine now so she can follow up.
Well, thank you, Eric. One of the things that we thought was really important when we're talking about streamlining pathways to accelerate adult learner progress in and through our programs and on into the workforce is to kind of give you a little bit of a framework. So you saw the LMI and the importance for identifying what are some priority pathways that you can emphasize this work in. If for some reason you're not able to do all of the pathways that you offer at your institution, there are opportunities to identify some priority pathways, and certainly the labor market information can help you identify where some of those priorities are. One of the other key elements for how you might accelerate an adult learner's path through your institution and on into the workforce or into transfer if you're at a community college is thinking about what that alignment between non-credit and credit looks like. We talked just briefly a little bit about this when we met in December, but worth elevating again here the importance of this, that leaders in post-secondary have to look at how they identify and eliminate silos, which end up becoming barriers for those adult learners, particularly as they look to make transitions between non-degree programs, non-credit programs, and into credit programs. So the more that you can create alignments between those, the better off the learners are going to be. And we shared some examples of this before, but this is, again, a kind of a stark reminder of why this is so important. What you'll see here is that when you have non-credit and credit as two separate things, which again, it's very likely to continue being the different things at many institutions, sometimes there are program differences, and that can lead to challenges when it comes to structure, credit designation, and even value determination. Oh, that's offered for non-credit. It's not offered at the same level as we would do it for credit. That's some of the language that may be used. The result actually, though, is in many cases you're duplicating efforts. And so you want to minimize how often that happens. We talk a little bit about stakeholder differences, or at least we view them as differences, so that we end up with different student experiences, and even some of the faculty and staff that could or should be shared between credit and non-credit may not, in fact, end up being shared. And so there, in some cases, are either real or in some cases just perceived stratification that this has a different value determination than that. And so the third thing that you see there is operational differences. And this goes to how we award financial aid and funding support, as well as how we offer supports for students and even the access to technology that students may have. There are some institutions where a student who's a non-credit student may not get an ID card, which means that they aren't able to access services at the library or the tutoring center or other services that are associated. That makes them feel less than, and we want to try to minimize that as much as possible. We shared a little bit about this framework before, but just a quick reminder that there are 5 elements when you want to align credit and non-credit that you should be keeping in mind. And these are things that you can think about emphasizing either all of them or pieces of them in your proposals as you move forward for how to better serve adult learners. So treating all students as students, just kind of ending where beginning where I just ended with that last slide. Making sure that all of your students feel like they are valued parts of your college community, building those pathways between non-credit and credit credentials, and being able to clearly communicate that to the students, and making sure that advising knows this as well. This is probably one of the more challenging ones, and that's aligning departments and governance so that there are shared decisions that are made, and it also has the added benefit of removing some of that either real or perceived stratification, as well as making sure that folks who may be in non-credit see and feel valued. And especially since in many cases they're able to provide access directly to the workforce, where in some credit departments, it's a little bit longer journey. So creating that alignment can actually open doors for the learners. Making programs credit worthy or credit based. We'll talk a little bit more about this when it comes to learning recognition, but when you do this, then it kind of eliminates the need for folks to justify and to go through a lot of the credit for prior learning that we'll talk about here in a moment, or even prior learning assessments. And then the last one is removing those barriers to transition, like financial barriers, which are some of the hugest barriers. Registration barriers can also be an issue, especially if non-credit assigns one student ID number and the credit side of an institution assigns a different student ID number. Using unique identifiers, one for the student at the institution period, rather than different numbers, is certainly of value. We kind of mentioned learning recognition, and learning recognition is inclusive of things like credit for prior learning assessments, and other ways that you may be able to recognize and acknowledge the learning that students come with. So students who are awarded credit for prior learning actually take more credits on average than students who aren't awarded credit. So one of the arguments that we a lot of times hear for not doing CPL is that, oh, that means that students aren't going to be taking my courses, so my courses are going to get canceled. And the reality is that there's plenty of research that shows they actually end up taking more credits because they have that firm foundation and feel much more comfortable. And the more that we see conversations around the value, students questioning the value of post-secondary, doing this helps them to underscore that value proposition. There are a couple of key elements for credit for prior learning. So thinking about making it systemic as much as possible. Jeremy's some of the priorities that Jeremy outlined for the 2IA awards are things that are systemic, not little one-off boutique programs, but things that can be systemically applied for learners. And when they're systemic, they're a lot less likely to cause disparities between those that have and those that have not. Making them transparent, making sure that students know about it and can see it. Obviously faculty driven. Faculty are the owners of the curriculum, so we want to make sure that credit for prior learning is something that the faculty can drive what that process looks like. And then collaborative as much as possible, because when you collaborate to create these systems and structures, then more folks know about it and more folks can communicate about it to the learners. This is just a couple of key things that will help for scaling credit for prior learning. So agreeing on what the modalities are depending on program, building institutional capacity. So identifying what's working. So those assets, again, talking about the faculty owning it. So having a steering committee that regularly, as part of a normal business rhythm, looks at this information and updates it, because we end up with new credential programs, new programs at our institutions, and new programs and workforce careers out there, and creating what does it look like if a student comes in with advanced manufacturing experience? How can we parlay that into credit that they can apply toward an associate degree or a bachelor's degree? One of the other things that becomes really important as we go through this work is the agreements that faculty make at a community college, making sure that those are made with an eye not only about here's the student in front of me at my institution, but what are we putting in place that's going to help that student when they transfer to the four-year institution? It doesn't do any good if a community college awards credit for this particular experience or learning that a student has, and then when they get ready to transfer to the four-year institution doesn't also recognize it. That has the student starting over again, which is less productive and certainly does not accelerate a student's progress. So we'll talk a little bit more about that through the lens of stackability, which is kind of the next key element. So we talked about learning the labor market information. We talked a little bit about NCAL. And you got to love my emojis that pop up just randomly when I start counting on my fingers. But we talked about learning the labor market information. We talked a little bit about aligning non-credit and credit. And we've now talked about learning and recognition. All of this comes together when you start thinking about stackability. So stackable credentials are those that ensure that students have equitable access to on and off ramps to learning while they're working. So if a student isn't able to continue straight through, they are able to take that off ramp, but know that when they're ready, they can come back and pick up where they left off. So again, that when we're talking about making things seamless and accelerating progress, that's what we want to be doing, is creating structures that allow us to do that. So stackability can help us do that. Equitable access, flexible training options, and what it actually ends up doing is increasing enrollments as much as possible. Because those students, when they know that this pathway exists and what that pathway looks like, they're able to come back when they're ready, or even in some cases when you entice them back. Some of the work that Andy shared as part of College App is they may not know, hey, we've got this great new program that's available. It's aligned to this new workforce entity that's in our area, and this provides a nice on-ramp to them. So you can actually increase enrollments by creating stackable pathway options. While we don't have time to go into all of the elements of good stackability, I've got a highlight here of four of the pillars that are associated with good stackability. We did create a stackability guide that you can download and take a look at. It's got really great examples in it and some key examples. We're going to talk about the two in the middle for just a quick moment to think about mapping and aligning the curriculum and how you communicate that. Again, I'm going to go through this relatively quickly just because we want to allow some time for folks to connect with one another over the content that's been shared. But do want to encourage you to take a look at this. There's a lot of really great guiding questions and even a how to get started if you want to emphasize one of these as part of your projects that you're developing and the institutional change that's associated with it. So let's take a look at what it means to map and align curriculum. And so there's a list of key considerations here. Certainly ensuring that credentials have value in that labor market. That again connects back to what Eric has been sharing and Matt has been communicating as part of that labor market information. Making sure to update any professional or national accreditations that organizations may require as that measure of quality. And even then thinking about how course requirements can align to ensure overlapping coursework rather than things that are going to require the students to repeat information or content unnecessarily. There's a couple of key things that you want to do. So create working teams that are tasked with mapping and aligning. This is challenging work. When we were, so I mentioned before that I came from a community college where we did the capital G, capital P guided pathways and trying to map curriculum, even just within an institution is a challenge. And what we're encouraging you to do is not only do it within your institution, but mapping it to the labor market as well as to other institutions that your students may be attending. So whether that's mapping from community college into the four-year institution, or even from adult basic ed programs into these credential programs. Building in stackable credential pathways that are based on agreement that is aligned with what you just did in terms of that workforce, that work stream task force that did that. And then the last element there is connecting with employers. Again, you don't want a pathway that leads to nowhere. So you want to create a pathway that is very strongly connected to the employers in your region. And again, that's part of the reason why Eric and Matt have been kind of pressing folks to identify service areas. This just gives you a good example of this in action. So South Texas College wanted to create some really great pathways for their English language learners and their adult education programs. And so they started with a mindset of no degree is terminal. And so they wanted to build that stackability so that there was confidence for the learners at every step of the way. As much as possible, they leveraged competency-based education. I know there's a couple of colleges on the call here that are very interested in competency-based education because it can actually help learners progress faster and with less debt. And anytime we're talking about value propositions, that's really important. The other pillar that we talked about that we mentioned we were going to cover is how you communicate these pathways and what do you need to know if you're going to communicate these pathways. So including descriptions of those pathways, clearly stating what those pathways lead to, both in terms of credentials, but also in terms of employment. So you want to be able to outline those employment opportunities that are associated with that pathway. All of that needs to be clearly communicated to the learner as much as possible up front so that they know what they're getting into before they get started. And you can reiterate it at transition points. So as students are transitioning from non-credit programs into a credit program, and if they're starting at a community college, how that transitions into the four-year institution. And at either the two-year or the four-year or even the non-degree credential point, identifying how, again, that maps into what the learners are going to do when they're in the workforce. Being able to communicate even job titles, salaries, skills, all of that needs to be part of the communication. I know our Jackson College colleagues have created some maps that they're starting to roll out with their college, with their learners, that have some of this information very clearly communicated so that a student can figure out what it is they want to do. So we see here that there are a couple of elements, again, designing student-centered communications, engaging with employers, and developing an internal communication plan. It does not do any good if stackability only exists on paper and on a shelf. This has to be communicated to the learners early and often. Here's a really great example at Miami-Dade. Where what they were doing was creating some learner personas to help them better identify what to communicate and how to communicate it. And they wanted to make sure that the faculty, staff, and their communications lead, I don't know if most colleges have either a marketing or a communications team. They want to have all of these things that they're taking into consideration. The audience, what's the message that you want? What's the action that you want them to take? How are you communicating? Are you using social media? Are you using paper or flyers or postcards as part of how you're communicating? Is it web-based? All of those are the mediums of communication. How often do you want to communicate it? Who's leading those communication efforts, and how are we measuring the impact of this? So we've had some colleges who have done very detailed maps by zip code to see where their learners are coming from, and being able to do some very specific mapping associated with that to see if their efforts are yielding benefits. And again, this kind of connects back to some of the things you were hearing in January with the college app presentation, is being able to get to that level of a zip code and even an individual to see, were we able to move this student to action, to enter a pathway, and to progress. One of the key elements that we don't get into a lot of detail here, but we'll get into when we break out, is what are the data elements that you need to know in order to figure out, is this working, and are we able to move anything in this respect? So we'll be asking you to think very strategically and intentionally about what are the data elements. So want to take a brief pause here before we go into breakouts to ask a couple discussion questions to figure out what resonates from what you heard around stackability, around labor market information, around aligning non-credit and credit, and along learning recognition. How does this work align with your institution's priorities? And what information do you need in order to know that this is working? So we'll talk I would love for a couple of folks to come off mute and share their thoughts before we go into breakouts. And what we're doing with the breakouts is we're going to put you in groups of colleges and just facilitate a conversation. But before we do that, anything that resonates with folks? And I have not been able to monitor the chat, so.
I was going to say, we had a question in chat, and it's
Perfect.
from Zena from Community College. As it relates to Title IV eligibility, are there any strategies financial aid offices are using to mitigate the eligibility challenges of adult learners?
That's a great question. I think what we'd like to do is to see if we can identify some best practices that might be able to help with mitigating that. Can you go ask a little bit, go a little deeper on what you mean in specific things that we need to mitigate? I know some of the things are around short-term credentials and even in some cases modularizing learning, but are there other things that you wanted to be able to address with that?
Yes, specifically adult learners, they've had a college experience prior to returning. So they often have satisfactory academic progress problems.
Right.
They also have aggregate limits for loans, Pell Grant eligibility.
Yes.
And it's a big challenge because what you don't want to do is disappoint them.
Right.
You know, so that's why I'm asking, what are other colleges doing? I have some thoughts about a proposal sending to the Department of Ed to see if we can participate in some kind of pilot for those students who have been out. Maybe I shouldn't say this, but for students who've been out for at least 7 to 10 years, see if we can do some creative, create some practices that could possibly help those students, and then, measure their completion rates, and maybe that'll be something going forward that the department will, recognize as maybe a choice to, eliminate some of the heavy lifting on the SAP requirements. So that's why I
Definitely
was
agree.
asking, what are other people doing,
Yeah, definitely agree on the SAP challenges. Would love to hear if there are some best practices that other institutions here are, and then I can share some creative ways of using other funding. We'll just use it, we'll explain it that way. But is anybody else addressing SAP challenges more specifically for learners?
Christine, I'm going to jump in real quick and just say, Zena, we'll probably follow up with you. Matt and I at the center were just having a conversation this last week on that exact challenge, and have flagged it as something that we wanted to dive into a little bit deeper as well. So,
And
All right, thank you.
I'll add for the group that Indiana statewide did some good work on this and created a grant program. It didn't eliminate the SAP challenges, but they were able to push it through where a returning adult could get, I think it was a $1,200 scholarship. So not a huge amount of money, but a decent chunk of change. And the thinking was that might entice them back. They kept it outside of SAP parameters. And then during that returning semester, they might do well enough to then kind of get over the hump with SAP. And I'll find that program online here in a little bit and drop the link into the chat.
Thank you.
And what Andy just described are some programs we've seen in other, at both an institution level and some at state levels that are doing something similar, where they're creating incentives and financial awards specifically to address that, at least as much as possible, so that it doesn't become an impediment. And you'll see that a couple of other folks have dropped some things in the chat. So Michelle dropped an article that gets at your question, and then Paige has shared that they have an academic forgiveness policy that can help. So other things that might have resonated, or questions that this sparked. And while folks are thinking, Eric, can you help me remember to see if we can identify a couple of other resources or opportunities that can help with the SAP question?
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing I would add, just thinking about sort of braiding any federal funds, something like SNAP E&T, maybe to lower the cost of tuition. It doesn't get around SAP, but yeah.
Okay. All right. I am going to shift us into breakouts where we can have some more detailed conversations around some of this content. We'll have about 20 minutes, give or take, for our breakout sessions. So let me stop share for a moment, and we'll get ready to open up the breakouts. Where's my breakouts room? There you go, breakouts. All right, so you'll see different pairings of institutions pop up on the screen. Click your really? Balloons? Okay, you'll see different pairings of, I don't even know how I did it. Don't even ask. So you'll see different pairings of institutions. Just click to join the pairing that you're a part of.
Christine, we need the LCC room.
I'm sorry, say that again.
No, it's there. It's there. Never mind. Sorry.
Okay. Like, I hope we got them all.
Yeah.
Christine, where do you find that?
So if you look at the bottom of your screen, you should see something that says breakouts. If your screen is minimized, it may be where the 3 dots are. So take a look and see if you see that. And it should say breakouts. And then you'll see different pairings and it'll just say join right beside it. And
Just
you should
scroll
be
to
able
the
to-
bottom. It's gonna bring up all the participants first, but if you scroll to the bottom, you'll see CMU Grand Valley, NMU Lansing, and a blue button to join.
Yeah, I'm not seeing that.
Yeah, Christine, Disraeli, I'm not seeing that either.
Yeah, I don't see it
Yeah,
either for
I don't
Muskegon.
see it either.
Oh boy. Okay.
We have a couple of folks who've been able to move, but maybe not everybody. Let's see.
I will do my best to move people. If you can change your, make sure you change your handle to what your college is, include that in your college. Okay.
And Disraeli, I'm helping, I'm starting at the bottom of the list if you'll start at the top. Mhm.
Oh, that was at the bottom. Okay.
Oh.
Brad, you're at Northern Michigan, right? Thank you.
Eric, did we get you off to your room?
Yeah, if you want to send me, I'm happy to go.
I'm trying to find where you are. Oh, there you go. Mhm.
And I need to move to the Jackson Mott room.
Is that Michelle?
Yeah.
Sending you now.
Thanks.
First, we've got you in the Alpena room, so we'll just send you over there. Mhm.
Technology is great when it works.
Yeah, I'm not sure why folks aren't able to see it, but it's okay. We're making it work. Mhm. And I think we've got most of the college folks.
Todd
That's fine.
Stannis, he's at Ferris, right? Todd's at Ferris.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, let me.
All right, Disraeli, I'm going to leave you to the last couple folks, which look like they're just our team. And I'm going to head over to the room I'm in.
And Drew. All right. Jeremy, Matt, you guys can go wherever you would like to go. Where would you like to go? I'm wondering if it pops up for you now that you can see the rooms. No? Still no?
No, I don't see anything.
No. It worked last time.
I don't know.
Wonder if
Jeremy,
there's
where
like
would
an
you like to
update
go?
issue.
It might be.
Um,
And I'm sorry I'm off screen. I am also ill, like Matt.
Aw.
Just hanging in there.
It's wonderful, isn't it?
I'm trying to convince myself that I'm not actually thinking of a cold, but I feel like it's happening.
All right. Can you swing me, Disraeli, into the CMU Grand Valley room to start? And then I
Absolutely.
might shoot you a message to move me at some point.
Bye, Jeremy. Andy, where would you like to go?
I don't know that I need to go anywhere, but I'm happy to if we need help.
If they need help, maybe just like listen in. Have you met with Fair State yet?
I mean, we work with them directly already, so I know
Oh,
other
okay.
parts say pretty well. Wherever you think. How
Let me
about
look at my
Lansing?
cheat.
I've gotten to know Lansing pretty well, and we've got a good.
Lansing? Okay.
them.
I'll send you over there. Lansing. Matt,
You put me wherever you want. I think Christine had me going to Lansing NMU, but if we've got enough there, you can send me wherever.
I'm gonna put you, let's see. Oh, these rooms are nice, full. He's in CMU. Which one's Michelle leading?
Michelle was leading the NMU.
I'm gonna put you in Western Michigan,
wait.
Kalamazoo Valley, and
Okay.
Ferris.
That works.
I think we had you in the other one to lead before we
Yeah.
found out things. Let me put you there.
Thank you.
Breakouts are in the process of closing, so welcome back.
Yeah, that part seemed to work, Israeli. Not sure why the
Yeah,
breakouts weren't being friendly this time around since they worked in our last one.
I know. And I'm so used to, and I'm on my laptop today, but I'm so used to it bringing the breakout rooms right up top and being able to select. But I even had to scroll down to the bottom, which was kind of weird. So technology.
Well, here comes the flood of everybody.
No. Oh, I'm sorry. Was that out loud?
Guessing
That
you
was
were
very
like
rude.
mid great conversation somewhere there,
It's
Allison,
like,
based on that reaction.
they're just saying things. Okay.
That's why I tried to give like the, 5 minutes, 1 minute, because it always ends up that someone's in mid-sentence whenever those rooms end.
Yeah, I was trying to say, hey, everybody, since we have notes, if you see anybody in this room who introduced themselves and they have a title that's of interest to you or are doing work that you're interested in, capture their name and reach out after. So
Did not happen quick enough, unfortunately. And apologies for anybody who got cut off in mid-sentence. But one of the things that we do try to do as much as possible is to come as close to starting and ending on time as possible, just because we know that you all are very busy folks and probably have other meetings to get to. So I'm going to share my screen for just a hot second, just to give you a couple quick reminders of what's to come before we adjourn for today. What I'm hoping that you'll do with each of these different convenings that we do is to look at them as a starting point for conversation. Not that you're going to get all of the information all at one time in these sessions, but that they are things to prompt, oh, I need to learn a little bit more about. So like for example, we were just talking about the Title IV question and the eligibility associated with that. So using that as a jumping off point to see, hey, we're going to need to figure out what we're going to do to address this in whatever intervention we put in place. So wanted to take just the last couple minutes to remind you of some next steps and to say we appreciate your feedback. So that's what that QR code is there for. Give us your feedback. We appreciate getting your feedback, and we try to make adjustments as much as possible to accommodate that. Number one, make sure to register for that in-person convening. You should have received an email yesterday with the link to register. Let us know if you're going to need a hotel room. I know it's still March in Michigan, so there may be weather challenges. Let us know if you anticipate possibly needing a room. We're happy to accommodate that. The expenses are covered for the room, so you don't have to worry about that. If you haven't done so already, submit those expenses from the January convening that we did. I know that our team is processing many of those as we speak, so do that. We also sent around in the email yesterday a reminder to update contact information. Every now and again, we'll get a kickback saying, hey, yeah, this person, either there's a typo in the email address or there's an issue. We try to get as many of those resolved as possible, but let us know if your team changes in composition, especially since some of the conversations we were just in, like, we probably need a few more people at this call around the data in particular. Review that occupations list that Eric and Matt shared as part of the labor market information. And then again, complete that survey so we can take a look at the feedback that you provide and leverage that for changes and adjustments that we make in the information moving forward. If there's information or questions you have about anything that we've shared today, let us know, because we have a lot more examples and or how-tos on these, but we don't want to throw all of it at you all at once. We'd rather give you the high-level information and then let you ask us, hey, can you give us more information on this based on your specific needs, rather than assuming everyone's got the same needs, if that makes sense. And I'll pause there. And thank you very much for joining us today. We are looking forward to seeing you in Lansing when our Lansing Community College folks host us in March on the 21st, but that doesn't have to be the only time you talk with us. We're happy to connect with you in between meetings as well, because you've got these great coaching sessions, taking advantage of those to make the most of your proposals. I'm going to stop recording.
The question is, who are the emails coming from? And I did just reply to somebody. They should be coming from cbarrow@edstrategy.org, or in some cases an S. Francis at edstrategy.org. But the one that most recently got sent was from Barrow.
Yeah, I didn't receive that. I'm the one that put it in there first, and then Dan also from Muskegon. The two of us haven't been receiving them the whole time, and so our provost has to keep forwarding them to us.
I didn't receive that either. Just
As